Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to the award-winning podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. If you like this podcast, you will love my new anthology called Moms Don't Have Time to Have Kids. Check it out, and you'll hear from 49 authors about all sorts of things moms don't have time to do. All the authors have been on this podcast. Also, check out my TikTok @with Zibby and Tracy, my other podcast, Sex Talk with Zibby and Tracy. Check out Moms Don't Have Time to Write on Medium. And of course, my new publishing company called Zibby Books. And now back to our daily author interview site and a quick hello from some of my kids. Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Enjoy the show. María Amparo Escandón is the author of LA Weather novel. Maria is the author of the #1 LA Times bestseller Esperanza's Box of Saints and Gonzalez and Daughter Trucking Co. Named a writer to watch by both Newsweek and the LA Times, she was born in Mexico City and has lived in Los Angeles for nearly 4 decades. LA Weather was a Reese's book club pick. Welcome, Maria. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss LA Weather.
Thank you, Zibby. Thank you so much for the invite. Yes, I'm also a mom, and yes, I don't have time to read.
How many kids do you have?
I have 2. They're in their 30s, so they're out in the world, but when they were growing up, oh boy, a handful. They're barely a year apart, so it was one right after the other.
Well, I have twins, so that was literally at the same time. And then I waited a while, and then my last 2 kids are 17 months apart. So I don't know. I'm like a glutton for punishment or something. But yes, you certainly have time to write, or at least now, and you're a filmmaker and all this amazing stuff that you do. So when did you, first of all, can you explain to listeners a little more about what LA Weather is about in case they're unfamiliar with it, which would be unlikely as it is a Reese's book pick and all over the place, but just in case they missed it, LA Weather.
Well, LA Weather is a family story. It's basically a family story. But the backdrop, of course, is LA. It's in the title. And it's the weather. And it's the LA weather. And I use the weather in LA as a metaphor for the life of this LA family. Because, some people out there believe that, the LA people, live like celebrities and everything is wonderful and sunny and great over here. And that's far from the truth. The reality is, everybody has ups and downs and drama and heartache. And so, when people say, oh, LA, it's always 72 and sunny. Well, that's also far from the truth. And so there's all kinds of weather events that affect how people live here in Los Angeles. The fires being lately the most, out there in the news. I myself have been evacuated twice. So, yeah, we do have weather.
Which part of LA are you in?
I live right by UCLA.
Oh, okay.
So we have a mountain right, up against our home, and with coyotes and deer right in the middle of the city. It's pretty wild.
We spend a lot of time in the Palisades.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, yeah, how pristine and, a lot of times, because California being so beautiful, I love it. They preserve the beaches, they preserve the mountains, they try not to build up everything. And so there's a lot of vegetation around. There's reserves, the Bayona wetlands are right on the beach. And you would say, oh, that's prime real estate to build condominiums and stuff, but they don't. They really preserve it. So I like that about LA. It's very respectful of the surrounding habitats and nature. So anyway, it's a story about family.
Yeah, sorry. It's a story about 3 sisters. And speaking of twins, in your book, I I was like having a heart attack and reading the beginning, like, oh my gosh. So I don't know if that even counts as giving it away because it was right at the start, but it was quite an opening. Let me just put it that way. Like you are immediately gripped. I mean, every parent's worst fear is something happening to the kids. And I don't know, especially when the grandparents are on watch. I mean, every time I leave them with anybody, it's like you're holding your breath a little till you get home. And oh my gosh, even just some of the imagery you put in the scene, like the shoes that had just scratched the boat that the mom had just been partying on, and now they're in the emergency room, and oh my gosh, just the detail and how quickly life can change is basically that. It's like it's like life changes on a dime. You don't know. I don't know.
Yes, I know. And I because I have kids, that is one of my worst fears. Now, that, of course, they're adults, but when they were little kids and they were growing up, to leave them, with a babysitter or an aunt or a grandparent, like you say, you leave them with some trepidation because I don't know. It's it's mom's worst fear, for something to happen to your kid. And I needed a trigger of that caliber to propel the family into chaos. Mm-hmm. And that's what happens, and without getting into all the spoilers and all that, this is a trigger that sort of, puts everything into question in the family. And in order to come together, first they need to disintegrate. And then it's rebuild when everything happens. And it's a story. It's actually a disastrous year for this family. They have everything: disease, divorce, betrayal, secrets. But I've had years like that in my life, and some people have told me, oh, there's just too much happening, it can't be real. And I said, oh, yes, it can. Definitely. It's one of those years when, you're at your New Year's party and you're toasting for the new year and you just think about the year you just lived and you go, good riddance, get out of here. and so it's a year in the life of this family, starting January to December. And all the weather events that I write about, the fires, the flash floods, if there is a full moon, the temperature, all of that is real. I researched it. So on the day it says there's a full moon, there was actually a full moon. Fires are all real. So they happen in the right moment in the story on the right day. That is real as well. So there's just one that I made up, which is Christmas morning. I wanted it to rain and it didn't. I said, well, you know what? This is fiction. I'm going to make it up.
Wow. That's really neat. Mm-hmm. Wow. So one character I found sort of alternately, well, let's talk about the dad character because this is mostly about women. The story centers around the women. And yet there is a man going through a hard time and not really knowing his place in the world. And I feel like you hear so much about when people retire and losing life's purpose and suddenly only able to sit in a chair. I mean, usually the TV is on versus off, but still, whatever. That sense of being lost, even when you're home, which I think he really encapsulates. Tell me about crafting him as a character.
Well, I based Oscar on actually a little bit on my dad. He's not exactly like my dad, but my dad fell into this depression in the 80s where his business went under, my mom got cancer. It's like perfect storm situation where everything sort of collapses. And he just, instead of, just going into, fix everything mode, he went the other way and he just landed on the couch and watched the Weather Channel for hours on end. And it was really funny. Well, it wasn't funny, but but I lived in LA and he lived in Mexico City. And he would call me long distance to tell me, take an umbrella, it's going to rain. He was my weatherman. Yeah, but really, it's exactly like you say it. Oscar was lost because even though this is a story about women and all the story. But here is a guy who is surrounded by a wife and 3 daughters and an aunt. So it's all women around him. And all these women, one or another way, affect him very directly. So his wife, his daughters, even his aunt, they all have expectations, and he feels very stressed because he feels responsible and feels like he needs to deliver. And sometimes men have these issues, and it's pretty taxing on their personality and their lives.
It's true. And it's hard to watch, right, when that happens as well. But that was, of course, just one of many interactions that the family has and different personalities. And, you do such a good job of immediately letting us get to know all the different people with details. And anyway, it's just very immersive. Tell me about when you got your start sort of writing and doing everything with film and all of that.
Well, I actually started writing in 2nd grade. And as a matter of fact, because I was writing, I flunked and I had to, be held back in 2nd grade because I hadn't learned anything. But when I started to get real serious was when I was 16, after I read 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I said, I want to really do this. And so I joined a workshop. And I was a mascot. Everybody was an adult and this teenager. But it was very formative. It was wonderful. And I've been writing ever since. I got a lot of stories published while I was living in Mexico. I got them published in journals. And I was writing in Spanish. But then when I moved to LA, when I was 23, right after college, I decided, well, if I'm going to live here, I better learn English. I better learn the language and learn to write in English. And so I joined workshops at UCLA Extension and eventually became a teacher. I've been teaching there for 26 years. But that really was a wonderful experience and really helped me to learn the language. And so when I wrote my first novel, Esperanza's Box of Saints, I said, I'm going to write it in English. And it was hell. It was so difficult. I had the dictionary, the thesaurus, right by my side. And I used to call my friends, how do you say this? My kids were little, but I would ask them because obviously they were born here, so they were fluent. So my 8-year-old and my 7-year-old is like, how do you say this? And, oh, Mom, why don't you just give up and stop bothering us? No, but I did learn a lot. The novel got published. And so I said, okay, so maybe I can do this. And so the 3 novels that I've written have been published in English. And then I've done my own translation into Spanish.
Wow.
Which was also a lot of fun to go back to my native language and transcreate into Spanish. Yeah.
Wow. And then how did it feel having this get picked by Reese's book club? What was that like?
Well, of course, I fell off my seat when I was what? Because I've been a fan, since the beginning. I've been a fan of the club, and I read most of the books that she picks. And the fact that she picked my book was a shock to me. I had no expectations. It never even crossed my mind that something like that could happen. And so I feel very honored because I love all the authors that she picks. I think that they're fantastic and very talented and creative. And so to be able to be in that group is quite a privilege. Yes.
I saw all over Instagram that many of you authors met up at the new pop-up. That looked like fun.
That was great. That was quite something. She's a force of nature. She's incredible. She's an entrepreneur, great actress, but also a producer, and she has her book club. And then she has an NGO, which is called Lit Up. That, your listeners, you guys should really look it up. It's what she does is she does a call for entries for writers who come from underrepresented minorities, and they pick the best projects and their manuscripts of novels or, collections of short stories, and they become fellows, and then they pair them up with mentors who are published authors, and they work with them on their projects. I think that's amazing. So she's doing that. She's doing so much for women's literature. And this pop-up that she did in LA is, how it's a pop-up store, it's a store, but she did it beautifully, all pastel colors. And she, of course, was selling all the books with all the authors and other items that she also promotes, like furniture and candles and mugs, just cool stuff. And she did an event, and there were maybe about 8 of the authors in town. And so we met there, and it was so much fun to actually meet them in person. It's such a rare thing these days to be at an event. It was a small event, but the fact that I was able to meet the authors that I read their work, it was really cool.
Oh, that's awesome. Congratulations. Really neat.
Thank you.
What advice would you have for aspiring authors?
For first-time authors who get their work published?
Or aspiring people who want to be authors.
Oh, okay. Well, I would say when you're developing a story, you want conflict. I think that's something that really moves stories along. Obviously, bad choices make great stories, because the more you get your characters in trouble, the more interesting it becomes. No wonder. It's no wonder that, all those stories, and they live happily ever after, the end is because when there's no conflict, why continue the story? It becomes really boring. So okay, Prince Charming and they're married and happy and they have kids and end of story, So look for conflict, get your characters in trouble. Another thing that I would probably recommend aspiring writers is eliminate the word aspiring. Because if you're already writing, even if it's a journal, you're already a writer. You're not aspiring. Somebody who aspires is somebody who is not doing it at the moment and would like to do it. So by just eliminating the word aspiring, it kind of weighs you down. If you take it out of your vocabulary, you say, I'm a writer, it's almost like, yeah, you're doing it. You're already there, I like that. The other thing that I would probably recommend is embrace writer's block. And it sounds weird, but the reality is, I believe writer's block is my brain telling me, stop and think. Don't just sit down and try to write because you're not ready. And so let yourself get into the mood, get into the story. When I get asked, how many hours do you write a day? I say, I write all day. Day and night. I write in the car, at the grocery store, in the shower. I write everywhere all the time because I'm thinking about my characters all the time. So how many hours do I type a day? Well, that's different. For me, it's like downloading what I've been thinking about. So when you have writer's block, it's because you want to type before thinking. So put your computer aside. And as you go about your day, just think about your characters, about your story, the plot, all of that. And all of a sudden, you get the juices going and you start getting excited about it, and scribble a little note here, a little note there if you want. And then When you're ready, then you sit down and type. I think that really helps. And that's one way of embracing writer's block.
I love it. That's great advice.
Yeah.
I think people beat themselves up for the thinking part, but it is so essential. You're absolutely right. Amazing. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Maria. Thank you for coming on today. Thanks for chatting about LA weather. I'm actually coming to LA next week, so I'm hoping the weather is very nice.
Well, I think we're going to finally get some rain.
Oh, just in time. Yeah. All right. Well, whatever.
Just for a couple of days. It never lasts long, unfortunately. Well, thank you, Zibby, and have a wonderful time in LA when you come.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to meet you.
And I really, really appreciate your invitation. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for coming. Okay. Bye-bye. Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.